Welcome to the Experts in Sport podcast, brought to you by the School of Sport, Exercise and Health Sciences at Loughborough University. This podcast seeks to bring together the worlds of academia and professional practice. If you're interested in the latest research and trends in sport and want to hear from experts from around the world, then subscribe now, because this is the podcast for you. I'm your host, Martin Foster, Applied Sport Management Lead at Loughborough University. Today, I'm with one of our regular contributors, Senior Lecturer in Human Biology and Director of Biosciences, Dr Martin Lindley. And we're joined by Professor Michael Gleeson. Mike is a Professor of Exercise Biochemistry at Loughborough University. He retired in 2016 after 40 years of research and teaching in diet, metabolism, health, and the performance of athletes. He had particular interest in the effects of diet and exercise on the function of the immune system, and is a past president of the International Society of Exercise and Immunology. He has co-authored several books on exercise biochemistry, sports nutrition, and exercise immunology, and published over 200 research papers in scientific and medical journals. In 2020, he's releasing a series of healthy lifestyle guidebooks that have been written for the benefit of public health. Eat, Move, Sleep, Repeat, Beating Type 2 Diabetes, and the Pick and Mix Diet Loss Plan will all be released throughout the year, so keep your eye out for them. In today's podcast, we're here to talk about supplementation for the immune system. You'll hear Mike discuss the common micronutrient deficiencies athletes experience, the various effects of these deficiencies, before providing us with some recommendations of the types of supplements that may be useful to help prevent and reduce the duration of some respiratory illnesses. Hi Mike, hi Martin, thanks for joining us today.
Hi there. Hi Martin.
So, there's a lot going on at the moment with the COVID-19 pandemic and concerns with the respiratory infections. We've discussed some of this already with Professor Letty Bishop, where we focus more upon immune function and exercise for elite athletes. Today, we're going to focus more upon nutrition and specifically supplementation. But before we get any details of that, Mike, can you give us some insights into the effects of nutrient deficiencies on immune function?
Yeah, sure, Martin. But perhaps before we actually get into nutrition, maybe we should just mention, particularly for the athlete population that may be listening in, that the exercise they're doing, that regular activity, is probably actually helping to protect them as well, because one of the problems with COVID-19, and the thing that actually kills people, it's usually the older people that are dying and those that tend to be a little bit on the fatter side, shall we say. It's really an inflammation and a viral type pneumonia in the lungs that's actually the thing that kills them. And that's being instigated via sort of an overactive immune response, a very much pro-inflammatory response that results in inflammation in the lung, tissue damage, and essentially fluid getting into the lung that makes it difficult for people to breathe. But being physically active gives you essentially an anti-inflammatory effect, which will protect against that. And people with higher cardiorespiratory fitness levels and doing at least moderate levels of physical activity on a regular basis tend to be less susceptible to picking up respiratory infections than those who are actually completely, sedentary couch potatoes. So the athlete's already in a reasonably good position, providing they're not overdoing the exercise, as we probably heard from Letty in the other podcast. When it comes to nutrient deficiencies, well, your immune function actually relies on lots and lots of different nutrients because it's such a diverse, complex system anyway. And we know that specific deficiencies, just simple things like not eating enough energy, not getting enough protein, can depress immunity. But also some of those essential micronutrients, some of them are really, really important for immune function. And if you're not getting enough things like iron, copper, zinc, selenium in your diet, or some of the essential vitamins like vitamin A, vitamin D, vitamin E, B6, B12, folic acid. These things are all very important for immune function. Some in the production of white blood cells, which are our main immune defense, and other ones actually regulating and controlling what the immune system does when we become infected. So essentially, we need an adequate nutrient supply in order to achieve adequate nutrient status and stores of some of those nutrients in the body. That will give us good immune function and better defense against things like viruses and bacteria that cause those infections. And of course, the converse is that if we have inadequate nutrient supply, it leads to inadequate nutrient status and stores that impairs our immune function, and that then impairs our defense against those pathogens like viruses and bacteria. So we end up getting more infections, we get more severe infections, and in severe cases of malnutrition, of course, that can lead to death.
Okay, so today we're going to look at elite athletes specifically, and we've already mentioned that, you know, generally they're in good health, especially in light of our podcast previously regarding a reduction in training volume and their immune function potentially improving. So are there any deficiencies elite athletes often have? So vitamin D is an example, but are there others?
Yeah, indeed, vitamin D is a very good example. We did a study, what was that, about 2013, 2014, where we actually did a survey and measured the vitamin D status of around 250 of the Loughborough student athletes. And we found that sort of at the end of March, coming out of winter, over half of them had inadequate vitamin D status, and probably about a quarter of them actually had deficient vitamin D status. So that's a very large proportion of individuals who you would think would be eating quite well to support their training, but they were still deficient in vitamin D. And there is the issue with vitamin D is that we get most of it from sunlight, which of course we don't get enough of in the winter months. It's rather different to the other vitamins that we get essentially exclusively from the diet. But other things that can be deficient in athletes and are commonly reported as deficient can be iron, particularly in female athletes, also zinc and selenium, and some of those essential minerals like those, which I've already mentioned, are some of the ones that are actually important for immune function. So yes, there can be some common deficiencies in athletes, some of them caused by losing some of these minerals like zinc in sweating, for example.
So with those deficiencies that you just talked about, could you go into some specific detail regarding, as an example, vitamin D and what the problem with being deficient in vitamin D is, and then what the solution is?
Yeah, well, vitamin D has been known for a very long time to be very important for our bones, and a typical symptom of deficiency was getting that thing called rickets, where you've got sort of bendy bones and you ended up with bow legs if you didn't get enough vitamin D in your growing years. Vitamin D is also important for muscle function, and it's very, very important for immune function, and that's only really been recognized probably in the last 10 years or so. So if you don't have enough vitamin D, then quite a number of different aspects of your immunity become depressed. It's something that is actually produced in our white blood cells as well. They can take up some of the precursors of the active hormonal form of vitamin D and convert it into the active hormonal form, and that's used for switching on a lot of their immune responses against infections. So people with low vitamin D status, no matter what season we're in, whether it's winter, autumn, summer or spring, the people with the lowest vitamin D status, and particularly those that are deficient in the vitamin, they actually do get more infections, and they tend to get more severe infections and longer lasting infections. And we found that in the athlete study as well, that was the case. It's not only getting more infections, when you do get them, they last for longer, and the symptoms tend to be more severe.
So what would the recommendation be with vitamin D in terms of supplementation? I mean, we've all been on our back gardens for the last month, getting in the sun, but what would the what are the recommendation from a supplement perspective?
Yeah, I mean, in the summer months, it's not a problem. Once we get into April, the sunlight and the UV light from the sunlight becomes strong enough for us to produce vitamin D in the skin. And we only generally need about 15 to 20 minutes of sun exposure per day, just in shorts and t-shirt is enough to get enough vitamin D produced on a daily basis to meet our requirements. In the winter, it's a different picture because we don't have that strong sunlight, and you actually don't produce hardly any vitamin D in the skin in the winter months. You're becoming entirely reliant on what you get in your diet. The trouble is there aren't that many foods that have a high level of vitamin D content, and it's very actually difficult to get exactly as much as you need in the winter months simply by diet. You're not getting the sunlight, so the obvious answer is perhaps to take a supplement. And the amount you need to take to maintain your levels at what they would be in the summer months when we have the sunlight present is about 1,000 international units of vitamin D per day. That's the amount you need. If you're actually deficient going into winter, or have inadequate levels going into winter, and in that athlete study we found that about 30% of the athletes, even at the end of the summer months, sort of in the end of September, early October, didn't actually have adequate vitamin D status. So to get it back up to a near optimal level, you're looking at taking sort of 1 or preferably 2,000 units per day, every day throughout the winter months, and that will bring you up to optimal levels of vitamin D, which we measure really as one of the metabolites of vitamin D. 25-hydroxyvitamin D is the thing we actually measure in the blood to give us an indication of the vitamin D status. And to give you an idea, less than 30 nanomoles per litre is the concentration which is defined as deficient. Less than 50 is inadequate. Over 50 and up to about 75 is okay or adequate. Ideally, for optimal vitamin D status, particularly for immune function, you need to be somewhere above 75 nanomoles per litre, ideally up to about 100. So to get up there, you really probably do need supplements for most people in those winter months, not only athletes, but also the general population as well.
Just picking up on something you said there, Mike, with the needing about 20, 25, 30 minutes a day of sunlight. With the current athletes sort of being in lockdown, there seems to be a large number of people that have taken up to turbo trainers and exercise bikes and stuff, and they've refitted their office or refitted their garage into somewhere where they can exercise.
Yes.
Now that means that they're spending all their exercise time indoors. So is it something that they should be spending a daily basis, like doing a 20-minute stretch outdoors before they do their session, or a post-exercise rehydration outdoors, so that every single day they're getting some type of sunlight?
Yes, I would recommend that. Yeah, that would be a very good idea. You get the same sort of problems with athletes who are predominantly that train and compete indoors, like the basketball players, for example. You see that same situation with them, that lack of sunlight. If you're not out there taking advantage of that sunlight in the summer months, then you're not getting the benefit of it. You're not going to get it through a window because that will cut out most of the UV light. So get out there in the garden at least, or go out for a walk. Again, you don't need a lot of time. Don't overdo the sun exposure, just as you shouldn't overdo supplementation.
So what we are saying is that sunlight in the right amount is good, and supplements in the right amount and at the right times can be good.
Most nutritionists will frown at us for saying take supplements, but I think in this situation, in this pandemic, where the food may not be as variable as we'd like, then there is a strong message that is beneficial to the system.
That's actually a good point, Martin, because people find it difficult now to get to. Not everybody wants to go to the supermarkets. What you can get from there is limited if you're doing online shopping, if you can actually get on to do it. Yeah, people probably aren't having as much of a balanced diet as they would if they had free access to shops and markets and the like. Yeah, that's not a bad point to make. If you're relying on things like ready meals, which a lot of the older people are at the moment, then your diet's not going to be as good as it could be.
Oh, so what you're recommending is a regular daily supplement of vitamin D for those deficient, or during winter months for the majority of people?
Or even if a lot of the professional athletes can get their blood tested and measured, their actual vitamin D status. If you do that, then yes, you can judge then whether or not you do need a supplement or not. And there's no point in taking one if you're already at optimal levels. For most people, though, I suspect the amateur athletes, just the general public, they're not going to get their vitamin D status checked because it'll cost probably, upwards of about £100 to get it done by a qualified laboratory. And but if you want to guard against a possible deficiency, you're not sure if your vitamin D status is high or not. As I said, about 50% of athletes, typically it's not, who've not been getting it measured before. Well, just take 1,000 units per day. That won't do any harm, and you'll actually, guarantee then at least you won't be deficient or inadequate in the vitamin.
So for athletes that are currently in lockdown, as it were, who are hiding away in their garage doing 3 and 4 hour bike exercises per day, if they got themselves out to do a 20-30 minute stretch before or after they train, and keeping obviously a varied diet, but then did a single daily supplement, multivitamin or vitamin D, then that would put them in a very positive frame of mind about their immune system and about their ability to fight off disease.
Yes, that would be sound advice, I think. Yeah,
that sounds good advice coming out. So you mentioned a few other really important vitamins and minerals there. So you mentioned iron and zinc. So can you go into a bit of depth in terms of the, again, deficiencies, problems, and supplementation recommendations?
Probably the most important one of those in terms of immunity is actually probably zinc, because we have measured zinc status in athletes before and found it to be on the below the ideal, shall we say. Zinc has some very important roles in immunity, has lots of different roles in immunity, but one of the biggest, most important ones is that it actually helps to inhibit viral replication. The viruses that get into our body get into our cells, and then they use the body's own sort of molecular machinery to reproduce themselves. And there's an enzyme they use called an RNA polymerase, which helps them to reproduce the RNA, and then subsequently the protein of the virus is produced on the cell's own ribosomes. So they use our cells as machines to generate more copies of themselves, and can subsequently then invade other cells and carry on replicating that way. And one thing zinc does is it inhibits that enzyme, that RNA polymerase, and helps them stop replicating themselves in your body. So that's one big antiviral action of zinc. And some studies recommend taking zinc, maybe not on a daily basis, although there's no harm in taking anything that will give you sort of the normal recommended daily allowance for any of these minerals or vitamins. But the general recommendation with respiratory infections, and it can be the common cold, it can be influenza, or it might be COVID-19 nowadays, is that you take zinc lozenges and you suck those, and you need to take those sufficient amounts to give you 75 milligrams per day of elemental zinc. Now, that's about 7 times the normal recommended daily allowance, or RDA. So it's well above what you would normally take, and you won't want to take that on a daily basis throughout the year. But at the onset of getting kind of sore throat, tickly cough type symptoms, when a cold's just starting, if you start taking it then, the studies show that you can reduce your duration of that illness episode by about a third. As most colds last generally something like 5 to 10 days, you can be talking about knocking off about 3 days off the duration of your cold. So you're recovering quickly. The sooner you can get back to training. And this hasn't yet been trialled with COVID-19, but it's certainly something I'd be doing if I came down with symptoms, and I can actually get hold of the supplement in the shops or online. I've been looking recently, and a lot of places seem to have actually sold out of zinc supplements and lozenges, so perhaps other people have heard this story.
People are onto it
as well, and it's like the toilet roll, so they've run out of the stuff, but when it becomes available again, get your order in, I would say.
Picking up on the zinc then, if we do have a toilet paper shortage of zinc lozenges, then zinc's available from quite a wide variety of food in general. So you can get zinc from meat, shellfish, nuts, dairy product, eggs. There's a lot of beans and pulses, chickpeas, lentils. So because, I mean, they're all in small amounts in those foods, but it is in quite a lot of different foods.
Yeah.
So would you agree that one of the recommendations would be to have a very wide-ranging diet at this moment to try and capture as many different sources as you can?
Yeah, and that's true. It's true not only for zinc, but many of the other essential minerals and vitamins. So what we want really is essentially a healthy, diverse, well-balanced diet that's sufficient to meet your daily energy requirements. And that will give you all the nutrients you need and prevent deficiencies in pretty much everything, like I said, apart from probably vitamin D. There can be issues, of course, if athletes are vegetarian or vegan. Then if you're not having, for example, meat products, or somewhat even eat eggs and dairy products as well, those are the people who can be at risk of having deficiencies of iron and some of these other essential micronutrients, which are sort of much more abundant in animal products than they are in plant products in some cases, and zinc and iron.
So we've looked in some detail at vitamin D and zinc, but what about the common ones? What about vitamin C?
Yeah, vitamin C's sort of been associated with reduced common cold infection for a long time. In part because of its antioxidant effects were thought to be the main reason why. But it's not necessarily the case that it's only that. The evidence that vitamin C reduces infection risk after prolonged exercise in athletes came out of some studies that were done by Edith Peters in South Africa, who gave a whole bunch of subjects either vitamin C or a placebo for a daily basis for 3 weeks before they took part in an ultramarathon race. And then they asked the subjects to report how many, they measured how many of the individuals reported illness symptoms, that's respiratory illness symptoms, in the week or two following the race. And they found that taking the vitamin C supplement, and in that study they used a supplement of 600 milligrams per day, which is around 10 times the RDA, compared with placebo, just on normal diet, no extra vitamin C. They found that the vitamin C supplemented group, well, essentially it reduced their infection incidence by about 50%. So, and they showed that in a follow-up study as well. And when they tried adding other supposedly important vitamins like vitamin E to the vitamin C supplementation and supplementing with those combined, but the combinations didn't do anything more than with supplementing with vitamin C alone. So it does seem to be that one that's the important one. Studies that have just looked at vitamin C, say in the general population, without the sort of the stress of exercise and the impact that can have on the immune system, don't seem to show any sort of beneficial effects. So if you're in a stressful occupation, or if you're in a very highly physically active occupation, or you're an athlete, then vitamin C is one supplement that might be worth considering. And you probably need at least 200 milligrams per day and up to maybe 1,000 milligrams per day. These doses, although they're high, have been shown not to be harmful at all. And because it's a water-soluble vitamin, you tend to excrete any excess out in your urine. It goes down the toilet, in other words. So there's no real concerns with taking relatively large doses of vitamin C. And there's no point in taking more than 1,000 milligrams per day at very most, because your tissue levels will be saturated with a dose of that, or even something a bit less than that.
Okay, and what about probiotics then? I know this is a really big subject to cover in about 5 minutes, but...
Yeah, well, there's quite a number of studies that show taking regular probiotics. So again, this is taking probiotics on a daily basis in recommended amounts by the manufacturer. If you take that on a daily basis, it does seem to reduce either the incidence of picking up respiratory infections, again, particularly the common cold, because this is the most common infection that athletes and the general public get, is the common cold. And it does seem to reduce the incidence of that. It can also, in some studies, been shown to reduce either the severity or the duration of symptoms as well. And some studies where it's been done on a relatively large scale can also indicate that it also reduces some of the gastrointestinal infections that people can get that cause tummy bugs and diarrhea and that kind of thing. And it can be an effective treatment for antibiotic-induced diarrhea, which you tend to get after taking a dose of antibiotics for a bacterial type infection.
What specifically does the probiotics do to help?
Well, when probiotics, the probiotics, we actually say, are actually bacteria, and they are live bacteria. And when you ingest them, the ones that are effective actually get passed through the stomach, past the acid of the stomach, and a significant number of them survive and end up populating your small intestine, and particularly the large intestine, the colon. And there they join the large bacterial community that we call the microbiota that you have there already. And you're sitting in your gut right now, there's probably about 1 kilogram of bacteria. There's more bacterial cells in your gut than there is in the whole of your body compared with the numbers of human cells that you've got. So it's a relatively huge number of these microorganisms that we have in our gut, and we tolerate them because they give us some benefits of having them there, and they get the benefits of sort of the undigested food, the fiber and the like that gets down into the large intestine that we can't extract goodness out of, and they use it and they can break it down and ferment it. And some of those fermentation products can have significant health boosting effects, short-term fatty acids, for example. But also when you take these probiotics, they interact with the immune system that's in the gut. You've got quite a concentration of immune cells in places like the gut and the lungs, but that's because where foreign microbes gain their entry, either through the food and drink that we consume or in the air that we breathe in. So those are quite vulnerable areas of the body as far as infection goes. And the probiotics can interact with the immune system in the gut. Those cells can migrate to other areas like the lungs, and that's probably what's happening, that is the mechanism behind reducing the incidence of respiratory infections with something that's actually going into the gut and having an effect there initially. Some probiotics also seem to have some stimulatory effects on certain immune functions, like the activity of natural killer cells, which are important in killing viruses once they get into our cells.
So we've covered vitamin D, vitamin C, we've looked at zinc, we've looked at probiotics in light of the immune system. Do you want to provide us just with a brief conclusion around your recommendations to elite athletes or the general population with regards to supplementation?
Yeah, perhaps most importantly, in the present situation with COVID-19, nothing that you eat will actually stop you getting infected. The thing is so contagious. You do get a dose of it from somebody coughing in your face or something like that. What you've eaten won't stop you getting infected. What it might do is help you overcome that infection without the serious health complications that arise, particularly in the older people and the overweight people and people with these comorbidities of hypertension and the like. you can't really kind of boost your immunity if you've already got adequate levels of things. But there are some things that can actually help you tolerate those microorganisms once they get into the body and prevent you from producing an overreactive pro-inflammatory response, the thing that causes the real serious tissue damage in the lungs with COVID-19. So, eat a healthy, balanced diet, take the supplements like vitamin D and zinc at the appropriate times.
And Martin, have you got anything to add to that conclusion?
So probably the message is that we a varied diet, if possible, but if not, a multivitamin covering as many different multivitamins as possible is probably the better idea, rather than just focusing on a single nutritional supplement.
That's brilliant, Mike. Really appreciate you coming on to speak to us about supplements and how they can help the immune system, especially for elite athletes during this time of pandemic. So really appreciate your time. Thanks very much.
Oh, you're very welcome. It's been a pleasure to talk to you, Martin, both Martins.
Thanks for listening to our podcast. If you'd like to get in contact with Professor Mike Gleeson, he is available at m.gleeson@loughborough.ac.uk. Or you can find contact details of all the academics at Loughborough by visiting our website. Bye for now. See you next time.